My presentation is about designing for accessibility, why we do it and how. And Maria already mentioned that I've been working here at DevExperts for over 2 years, but my passion for accessibility started even earlier. So let me tell you how it started. Once I've been watching a webinar. It was about accessibility. At this point of time, I had no idea what is it about, but I just decided to join it. Maybe it would be useful for my career. And there was a guy, he had a tunnel vision, and he was trying to buy tickets. He was using interfaces and trying to buy tickets. So he had a huge screen, and he still was zooming it, and he was able to read only word by word. Because tunnel vision is as if you can see through a narrow tube. So I was really surprised that for some people it might be such a difficult journey to buy tickets online. And that's how it started for me. I was joining countless webinars, completing 2 accessibility courses, joining accessibility community, where there are almost 600 people who share my passion, who share their experience, and also support each other. And now, before we go to the presentation, I would like to ask you to look at these 2 sentences, and you can actually count it with your phone, or you can just guess how much time would you spend for correcting these words. Don't worry, later you will understand why we're doing it. So now we switch to the agenda. The presentation contains 2 big parts. First one is why accessibility is important, which covers reasons, who benefits from it, some statistics from the Netherlands, and one of the most important things is how to develop empathy. And second part is how to make products accessible, where we will discuss accessibility principles and guidelines, our fintech practices, a tool for accessibility annotation, and who to follow if you want to learn more about accessibility. And now, before we go to the presentation itself, let's check that everyone is aware of terms. So, usability focuses on making interfaces efficient and satisfying. Accessibility ensures equal access for people with disabilities. And inclusion aims for using interfaces without adaptation. And now the first part, why? So there is actually 3 major reasons, and we will start with legal one. So in many countries, there are actually accessibility acts which requires using accessibility. For example, it's Canada, it's already working. They already require accessibility features because they make it to be barrier-free by 2040. American government requires accessibility as a basis for doing business with them. And the European Accessibility Acts enforce to make designs of interfaces accessible by June 2025. So, of course, there will be like a transition period. For example, if your app was done before this point of time, you will still have 5 years to make it accessible. But if you start in developing later than this period, you will need to ensure your app is accessible from the very beginning. The second reason is the moral one. So basically, everyone should have equal access to the interfaces, and I don't think we should add anything. And the last one is business one. So people with disabilities is a huge market share. And of course, they use interfaces which are accessible, and they take in their families and friends along. So let's put it straight. If your app isn't accessible, you not only missing out on reaching wider audience, you also risk legal and financial consequences. And now let's discuss who benefits from accessible design. A lot of features which were initially made as accessibility features now are commonly used by all the users of the interfaces. Let's see the example. So it says that at one point of time, people with disability and like a regular person will have the same needs. So these needs might be permanent, temporary, and situational. And for example, a person with one hand, a person who have arm injury, and a person who just carries a baby or a heavy bag, at one point of time, they will have the same needs. And also, which is missing here is cognitive. For permanent, it might be attention deficit disorder. Temporary might be a person who just don't sleep much. Maybe he has 2 jobs or a baby. And situational, just a guy who had 2 beers, which he shouldn't. And for example, for all these people, at some point of time, it would be really hard to read the interface of the banking app, for example, of a trading application as well. And also, there was a research conducted by appt.org. This is the company from the Netherlands, which so the research was about accessibility settings, who actually use them. And for iOS, there was 45% of users who had at least one accessibility feature activated on their phone. And for Android, it was 59%. And among these features, like this is commonly used one, top 3 is basically the same. It's adjusting text, dark mode, and zoom or scaling, which are basically the same. And in the Netherlands, there are 25% of people who experience disabilities. And I was really shocked that the first place from the people with disabilities, it was taken by the group of semi-literate people. Like, later, I found out that in the USA, there is the same situation. So there was 21% of adult population who can read only on the level of the 5th grade. And 14% of them cannot read at all. So when we're designing interfaces, we should also think of the text we have. Like, it should be really accessible for all the people and understand it in the same way. And who these people are. Like, when we're talking about accessibility, we imagine some minor group of people who has some difficulties which we cannot really understand. So empathy is the key to get these people. Only when you start to interact with them, you can understand the problems that they experience. As I mentioned, like for me, it started with watching webinars, how people with disabilities using interfaces. And later, I started using this app, Be My Eyes. It's made for blind people, so they call you and ask you help in very basic daily things. For example, I had a woman, she called me and asked me what was the temperature on the washing machine. A guy who asked me what was written on the label of the bottle, and a man who just was asking what was the color of his shirt. So this app actually gives you a lot of insights of the life of blind people. And now, do you remember these sentences I was asking you about? So now we will understand why I was doing it. We will look at the video of TalkBack, which is Android screen reader, and a person would be using his phone and trying to correct them.
Let's see how spell checking works as I edit this message that I'm going to send to a friend asking to lunch this weekend. So first I'm going to go to Actions with 3 fingers swipe right.
Actions.
And I'm going to swipe down to move to the beginning of the text.
Move cursor to beginning.
And double tap.
Beginning of field.
So now I'm at the beginning. And I'm going to swipe left with 3 fingers to move to the spell check.
Spell check.
There you go. And I'll swipe down with 1 finger.
WNT.
And I'm going to swipe right with 3 fingers to Actions again.
Actions. Want. WANT. Text replace.
And Actions. I've selected 1 from Actions. So now I'm going to go back to spell check.
Spell check. Punch. Actions. Punch. WNCA.
And then correct lunch.
Text replace.
And let's go back to spell check.
Spell check. Pizza.
And we'll swipe right. Because somehow I misspelled pizza, the most important part.
Actions. Pizza. Text replace. Spell check.
Let's go back to spell check.
No misspelled word is found.
And no one is spelling, so now I can send the message to my friend and hopefully we can get some pizza.
Sending message.
Sorry. Okay, so I actually counted. It took me 11 seconds to correct these words. And this video we just watched was about 2 minutes. So of course he was explaining what he's doing, but I don't think it's really possible to correct all these words like using this feature in less than 45 minutes. And you know, this was really positive experience. Like it was introduction of new features for Android accessibility. And real people, they don't usually have such a great experience. For example, I was watching an interview with a blind user. She spent 2 hours buying socks because she used 3 different browsers as the website had different accessibility features on all the sites. So I cannot really imagine having so much patience and motivation for buying socks. Like 2 hours, that's a long time. But you know, some people, they don't just have choice. So that's why it should motivate us for making our interfaces accessible. And now let's talk about how. So WCAG, which is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, has 4 principles for accessibility. First one is perceivable. It means that people should be able to perceive content in the way they can do it. Understandable means that all the people should understand the content in the same way. Operable means that people should be able to interact with it. And robust is about interface to be usable with assistive technologies. And let's see which assistive technologies people with disabilities use. So blind people use screen readers and keyboard. Here you can see Braille keyboard. People with low vision use magnifiers and keyboard. Deaf and hard of hearing people use closed captioning and speech input. People with mobility impairments use speech input or alternative input device or both, and keyboard as well. And unfortunately, there is no assistive technologies for people with cognitive disabilities. But let's face the reality, right? Guidelines are great, principles are great, but sometimes you can just talk with your client and he will tell you that, you know, I don't have blind users, I don't need accessibility. And it would be really hard to argue with him and explaining that accessibility is actually not only about blind users. But what might be useful for you is talk about one group with disabilities, which is usually forgotten, is senior population, people who are over 65 years old. And these people can actually have several disabilities at once. So here are some guidelines which will help you in building accessible interfaces. So when we're talking about mobile is using native components, very often they have accessibility characteristics already applied. Check the contrast is very basic one. I guess everyone knows that there are plenty of contrast checkers. Keyboard navigation, we just seen all the examples and like people use it a lot with different disabilities. Animation, we should pause it when it's lasts longer than 5 seconds. Use and play English, as you saw, like there are a lot of semi-literate people, and use and play English means no sophisticated terms, no slang, just very basic words understandable by everyone. Test with users, which is like crucial because while testing with real people, you can find up to 3 times more bugs comparing to testing with just tools for accessibility checking. Access scrolling might be confusing for elderly population, and breaking information into shorter sections just making reading more convenient. And now let's go to practice. So here you can see the example of our widget time frame settings, and this is the example of keyboard navigation annotation. So it has a start point, it has like all the dots which will go tab by tab, and this navigation is circled as it should be. Here is example of scaling. iOS and Android has scaling features, and in our company we making scaling up to we support scaling up to 200%. Here is a notation for screen readers. Like when you're making explanations, the text which screen reader will read, you should use the function, not the image. Like for example, if it's search, the common icon for search would be magnifying glass. And screen reader should not describe it as a magnifying glass, it should call it search, because it would be really misleading for blind users. And also tabs, like here's an example which is good to have the number of tabs while tabbing. And we will see one more example. So this is an example of inaccessible interface, which we had to correct. So here, as you can see, we have a hover, which shows hidden elements. There's an input and a couple of buttons. And also, in a top left corner, there's a sorting icon. Also, I guess, very basic one. So if you click it, it will just sort from Z to A and vice versa. But screen reader still can't do it. So here what we did, like sorting goes to the drop-down. It shows all the features that it, not features, but all the options that it have. And also we should be able to discard the sorting, apply it, and just go away from this drop-down. And all the buttons that were in rows move into the menu on the side, like in the beginning of the row. So when we go one by one using screen reader, we will be able to access all these hidden elements from this menu, not with hover. And also, I would like to show you this amazing tool made by eBay. It's a Figma plugin. So if you start applying accessibility, I guess it might be a really useful one, because it contains a lot of accessibility features within it. So I will show you like in a minute a video of it. What it does, it gives you a checklist, it scans your design, it checks if there are images, if they're decorative, or if they have text, so we can type alt text for them. Also, it gives you ability to make navigation, like a keyboard navigation, and also it checks your design for contrast and gives you all the like errors that you have. So this is like basically how it works. First, you like have a landmarks, and there's also already presetted ones, so you can just go through your designs and make a landmarks. Then headings, reading order, alternative text. So you cannot forget anything because there is a checklist and it differs for mobile and web applications. And one more advice who to follow is DQ company. So what they do is they help in different companies to apply accessibilities. They have a lot of experience in this field, and they have even DQ University where you can study accessibility. But what I like in this website is this news and resources tab, because there is like a lot of news from all the big companies they, I guess, are there, and also there is a blog. So people with disabilities share their experience, and just people who experience in accessibility give their advice. And to sum up, like everything, accessibility requires a lot of practice. It's like learning a new language. Don't try to make the whole your interface fully accessible, because while you're spending time making everything perfect, it means that your app is still not accessible. So if you have a tiny piece ready, you should release it as soon as possible. Accessibility is never-ending journey. So there will always be new operational systems, new browsers, and you will always have a lot of work to do, but we should just do it step by step. And the last one, as of 2022, 97% of web was not accessible. So you cannot make things work. And doing a little bit of accessibility is actually making a lot. So thank you so much for listening.